Good afternoon, and welcome to the Libertarian Futurist Society's 2026 Prometheus Award ceremony. I'm William H. Stoddard, president of the Society and chair of the Hall of Fame Committee, which selects finalists for the Hall of Fame Award. Today, we're going to begin with the Hall of Fame Award. It's my pleasure to introduce our first guest speaker, Ilya Somin, who will start off the ceremony by presenting our keynote address and presenting the Hall of Fame Award. Dr. Somin is a constitutional lawyer who teaches at George Mason University. He was born in the Soviet Union, which gave him an early exposure to the evils of repressive government. His parents brought him to the United States 5 years later. His latest book, Free to Move, presents an appreciation of the virtues of interjurisdictional mobility for preserving a free and well-governed society. He's also a regular contributor to the Volokh Conspiracy, a group blog now published through Reason Magazine, a libertarian monthly that has been published since 1968. The Volokh Conspiracy has consistently interesting commentary on legal issues, including many current Supreme Court cases. Somin's essay on libertarianism and science fiction was published in our newsletter Prometheus in summer of 2011. It shows an appreciation of pro-freedom themes in the fantastic genres that LFS members share, which make Dr. Somin an ideal speaker for our Hall of Fame Award. Dr. Somin, welcome to the Prometheus Awards.
Thank you so much. It is an honor to be here and to have a small hand in presenting this award. Appropriately, I'm going to devote my keynote talk to discussing the relationship between libertarianism and science fiction broadly defined. I'll explain why libertarianism and also is more represented in the science fiction genre and in the closely related fantasy genre than probably in any other literary or popular culture genre. I'll give some examples, and I'll briefly talk about why it matters, why we should care. Though for many of us in the current audience, the reason why we should care is simply that we're science fiction fans and also libertarians. We care for that reason, but there are reasons why this could be important even for other people who are less interested in science fiction or less interested in libertarianism than most of us are. So science fiction and fantasy, I think, are closely related genres, partly because it's very difficult to tell the boundary between them, and partly because both are set in imaginary worlds far removed from what we consider our everyday reality. And it is striking that these two closely related genres have a large amount of libertarian ideas in them. I would just give a few examples from some of the most prominent franchises of the last several decades. One obvious one is The Lord of the Rings, where it is notable that the Ring of Power must be destroyed. It cannot be wielded safely even by the wisest and best people like the wizard Gandalf or others. None of them can be trusted with it, and it's an obvious metaphor for political power. It's also notable that the government of the Shire, where the hobbits live, which is sort of the most ideal society in some ways in Tolkien's work, is very similar to a libertarian night watchman state. The powers of government are very limited. And near the end of the book, I don't want to ruin the ending of The Lord of the Rings too much, but there is the episode of the Scouring of the Shire, where an authoritarian socialist-like government is temporarily set up in the Shire, and it seems like a clear indictment of socialism and was intended as such. And of course, Tolkien's views that he conveyed in his fiction were very skeptical of government. As he put it, the most improper job of any man, even saints, is bossing around other men. Not one in a million is fit for it, and least of all those who seek the opportunity. Tolkien was not a libertarian. He was more of a conservative traditionalist, but he certainly had the libertarian suspicion of government power, which is reflected in The Lord of the Rings and actually in much of his other work as well. One can say similar things about the Harry Potter franchise, the other big fantasy franchise of the last several decades. Again, I don't want to ruin the plot for you too much, but in addition to Lord Voldemort and his Death Eaters, the enemy of the protagonist that we see throughout the books is actually the government of the wizard world, the Ministry of Magic, which, as legal scholar Ben Barton put it, is an all-bureaucracy government that is similar to most negative negative possible versions of public choice theory. It's oppressive. It detains people without due process. And at the same time, it actually does a terrible job of doing the work of actually protecting the people. So much so that when it's taken over by Voldemort late in the series, it's only perhaps moderately worse than the regular Ministry of Magic is. And of course, the good guys who ultimately prevail, they do so through private self-help organization, the Order of the Phoenix. Rowling, like Tolkien, was not and is not a libertarian. She's more of a conventional left liberal, but I think her series has obviously strong libertarian themes and suspicion of government, even though she herself is not a libertarian. Perhaps the biggest new science fiction franchise of the last 25 or so years is the Hunger Games franchise, written by Suzanne Collins. And of course, the setup of the Hunger Games is in some ways stereotypically libertarian. We have an oppressive central government, the capital, exploiting the 12 districts with forced labor, taxation, no representation, all sorts of oppression, and the like. It's notable that the capital, especially as envisioned in more recent books in the series, which I very much recommend, even though they're less famous than the original trilogy, the capital represents a kind of right-wing authoritarianism where the idea is we need this government to provide order and security. But when the heroine, Katniss Everdeen, manages to escape the capital and ends up in District 13, which is leading the fight against the capital, what you see there is a kind of left-wing oppressive statist government that seems socialist in many ways, and over time, again, I don't want to ruin the plot too much, but over time it becomes very clear that the District 13 government is just as bad as that of the capital, even though it has a somewhat different ideology. The president of District 13 is named Al McCoy, which is a sign that she's the other side of the same coin as the president of the Capitol, President Snow. So it's notable that sort of both left and right-wing statism get beaten up in the Hunger Games series. And you see some of these themes develop more fully again in the prequel books, which have come out since the original series. There are, of course, many other libertarian themes in prominent science fiction and fantasy works. I do not have time to go over them all. I'll just mention a few. Robert Heinlein, as most of you likely know, was one of the founding fathers of modern American science fiction. And he, of course, was consciously libertarian in his ideology. The same thing is true of a number of other very prominent science fiction writers like L. Neil Smith, Larry Niven, David Brin, though obviously Brin, for example, has a very different strain of libertarianism than Heinlein. There are also many non-libertarian authors in the genre who nonetheless have works that have libertarian themes. Ursula Le Guin is a famous example. There are many others. If I go through them all, I will use up all of my time and I would keep you here all day, but there are many of them. Now, I do want to emphasize that this does not mean that all or even most science fiction is actually libertarian. The majority is not. There's obviously lots of explicitly non-libertarian or even anti-libertarian science fiction. Star Trek, I think, is a good example. Much of Star Trek actually promotes what is a kind of socialism. And there's obviously a long history of other socialist science fiction. Less commonly, you have right-wing statist science fiction as well. It does exist, even though it's a bit less common than the left-wing or libertarian kind, and there are many other examples. So I'm not saying simply that like science fiction is inherently libertarian or all or most of it is, merely that libertarianism is much more represented in this genre than in almost any other popular culture genre or literary genre, at least that I can think of. So I want to ask, why is that? And I think that's true for several reasons. One is that because science fiction and fantasy are set in a different world from our own, this genre can more easily criticize and break with tradition. And of course, when you represent a somewhat radical minority ideology, being willing to break with tradition makes the genre more hospitable. If you're a libertarian, by definition, you reject many of the traditions of government power in our society, and indeed in almost every other one. Secondly, science fiction and fantasy appeal disproportionately to more educated and more politically aware people. I certainly don't claim that all highly educated people, or even most, are libertarian, far from it, but on average, libertarianism does correlate with education and interest in politics, so a genre that appeals to people like that will be disproportionately libertarian. I think it's also significant that much science fiction and fantasy literature has scenarios that involve dystopias of various kinds. And of course, an evil, oppressive government is a very common type of dystopia. So literature where you see a lot of dystopia is likely to have disproportionate libertarian themes. Finally, I think there is a correlation and a relationship between being libertarian and being a technological optimist. Most libertarians welcome new technologies like nuclear power, new forms of travel, the internet, more recently AI, whereas, of course, right-wing traditionalists, but also many socialists, are often suspicious of new technologies for various reasons. Science fiction, on average at least, is a genre that's sympathetic to technological optimism, though of course there is some techno-pessimist science fiction, and therefore there's an affinity there with libertarianism as well. So I think all of this explains and helps explain both why libertarian ideas and libertarian people are more represented among science fiction and fantasy authors than in other genres, and also among the readers. I will mention just one more point on this, which is that on average, fantasy and science fiction disproportionately appeals to men as compared to women, and libertarianism, the data says, also is disproportionately male. I think it should not be that way, but that correlation does exist and is relevant. Finally, why is it that we should care about this relationship other than just that it's interesting to us because we're interested in the subject? One reason is that many more people watch and follow science fiction and fantasy literature, movies, TV shows, and so forth than read any kind of serious political and public policy analysis. Check out my book, Democracy and Political Ignorance, on why most people do not know much about government and public policy. So popular culture genres like this one do have some influence on people's political views, and therefore it's notable that this one is disproportionately libertarian in a way that most others very much are not. And there is the implication that libertarians who want to can try to use this genre to help promote our views. I think we should also think about to what extent libertarian ideas can be more prominent in some other genres as well, and I think libertarians should give more thought to that. There are certainly other genres that appeal to other groups in the population, which I think are underexploited by libertarians. I've in the past mentioned the genre of crime and mystery fiction, which seems like a natural for libertarian ideas, but libertarians make very little effort to get into that one. So in conclusion, I think it's clear that science fiction and fantasy are more libertarian than almost any other literary or popular culture genre. This provides some useful insights on what kind of people are attracted to libertarianism and what kind perhaps not. And also it may help us more effectively promote libertarian ideas in the future. And now I come to the most important part of my duties today, which is to present today's award. This year, there will be a 50th work inducted into the Prometheus Hall of Fame for Best Classic Fiction. And we have 5 novels, all published between 1932 and 2003, that were selected as the 2026 finalists. All 5 of these are obviously great works in the field. The first is James Blish's The Star Dwellers. We next have C.S. Lewis, That Hideous Strength. Then Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, Adam Roberts, Salt, and Charles Stross, Singularity Sky. And dramatic pause before I announce the winner. The winner is Aldous Huxley, Brave New World. Accepting the award will be Jack Miles, a trustee of the Aldous and Laura Huxley Literary Estate, followed by Huxley's 2 grandchildren, Tessa and Trev Huxley. I congratulate the winner on this well-earned award. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ilya Somin, for that fascinating keynote address. And now, speaking for the Aldous and Laura Huxley Literary Trust, I am pleased to salute the Libertarian Futurist Society for awarding the Society's Prometheus Award to Aldous Huxley's dystopian masterpiece, Brave New World. By imagining proleptically and prophetically just how far state control over society might go, Brave New World delivered a warning that is as needed now as it ever was. During the same week, when I learned of this new honor for Huxley's novel, I learned that the state of Iowa has required its removal from school libraries under a statute banning from the libraries any book with sexual content. HarperCollins, as a publisher of many affected books, challenged the legality of the Iowa statute in court and won at the district court level, but then lost on appeal. Currently, rather than file a further appeal addressing the statute as such, the publisher has filed a narrower appeal of the statute's applicability to Brave New World. Any serious reader might be reminded at this juncture of how monstrously determined the state in Brave New World is to deter children from reading through behavioral conditioning that begins in infancy. Note well, the state that in Brave New World is so determined to deter children from reading is not in the least concerned to deter them from erotic play. On the contrary, erotic play is not just allowed but encouraged. Erotic play conditions children to assume their later role as adults in a society that positively requires promiscuous sex and proscribes only couple formation as a latent organizational threat to the state. As for reproduction, that is now a state function rather than a private one. So yes, Brave New World is in its way a book with sexual content. The Iowa authorities are right about that much. But what it aims to stimulate is not sexual arousal, but thought about the place of sexual arousal in social and political life. It is not, of course, a book for third graders, but it is certainly a book that might induce a high school junior to compare his consumption of pornography with the novel's presentation of feely cinema as a state tool intended to induce political passivity through sensual addiction. What should concern us more, however, than whether high school students in Iowa read Brave New World is whether adults today, anywhere in America, bother to read at book length anything at all, rather than allowing artificial intelligence, the soma of our day, to do their reading for them. Ashley Dawson, writing from New York for the Los Angeles Review of Books, reports that New York subway cars are now festooned with ads to obscure companies such as GenSpark.ai, proclaiming the time-saving benefits of artificial intelligence. And I quote, "Go home early," the perky ads declare. "We've got your spreadsheets." Some ads go further, depicting AI not just as an invisible workmate, but also as a furry purple llama sidekick that snuggles up to you, helping you approach the coming week with confidence and tranquility. Things are so extreme that you cannot even walk down the street in New York without being told by an ad on a bus that you should start using AI as your therapist. These ads have not been placed by a totalitarian American state because the American state is not yet totalitarian. But are there signs of a looming fusion between the Silicon Valley AI oligarchy and the Trump administration? On July 13th, the New York Times reported that Sam Altman, the chief executive of OpenAI, has long floated the idea of having AI companies give the country equity, including in meetings in Washington last month. And President Trump has mused publicly about the possibility of having AI companies provide the United States with stakes in their business. So perhaps as Sam and Donald make common cause, future seductive and omnipresent New York bus and subway ads will be paid for by AI owned by the United States, or if you will, by the United States owned by AI. I was 17 years old when I read Brave New World for the first time, and I hope that the HarperCollins lawsuit, by perhaps raising this short but prescient novel's profile in Iowa, may lead 17-year-olds there to read it, whether or not they find it in their school libraries. As for the adults attending this award ceremony, if you have never read Brave New World, or have not looked into it in years, pick up a copy, read or reread it now, and discover how very right the Libertarian Futurist Society was to honor this classic in this year with its Prometheus Award. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. This is Tessa Huxley, and I am Aldous Huxley's granddaughter. For some reason, I felt the need to reread Brave New World in February of this year, long before Michael called or wrote to my brother and I regarding the Prometheus Award. Like many of you, I'm sure, I read it as a teenager, and again in my late 20s and in my 30s, and off and on since then. But what really struck me in February was just how incredibly relevant the book is today in 2026. It just was striking. Fantasy seems to be such a significant part of daily lives, and thanks to our magical internet, we can drown in images of whatever fantasy we are currently having. And now with AI taking over the world, we have even greater opportunities to ignore the problems of our collective making. Climate disasters, economic collapse, wars, seriously, a little bit of soma, or the drug of your choice, could be swell. Sound familiar? I, for one, find our current world filled with vast numbers of people obsessed with self, comfort, pleasure, sex, shopping, you name it. It would seem that Aldous was really quite spot on in terms of where this world is heading. As a lifelong political activist interested in creating communities through community gardens, parks, and affordable housing, I have taken a different and not quite so subtle tack as my grandfather. Aldous tried to influence people through his writing, as I think he has done, but currently it appears to me that many of people are still willing to tolerate totalitarian-leaning societies as long as they themselves feel comfortable. I'm not a philosopher, a writer, nor a social critic, therefore I do not indulge in literary criticism. However, I want very much for admirers of Aldous's work to understand that he did not actually work alone. Our grandmother, Maria Niece Huxley, was an integral part of Aldous's work life. Aldous had very poor vision as a result of illness as a teenager. Maria provided Aldous with a vital link to the world around them. Maria created a life for the two of them that lasted over 33 years. Some of this work was typical for a wife of the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and even the 50s. But Maria was much more. She created the hub where she brought people to Aldous, providing for both his intellectual and social life, which was a true necessity for both his thinking and his writing. She helped Aldous work out his plots. In fact, he acknowledged that she was better at figuring those out than he was. She typed his manuscripts and provided criticism. Unusual for a woman of that time, Maria was the driver and chauffeur, which in the 1920s required her also to be an auto mechanic. She drove a Bugatti, which was adapted for Aldous's extreme height, leaving only one seat in the back of the car, turned sideways, for our father. Our mother, Ellen Hovde, used to tell a story about driving in Los Angeles with Maria, dressed as always in quite fashionable clothes. Suddenly, Maria stopped the car, explaining that it sounded wrong. Please, opening the hood and making some sort of adjustment and starting off again, pleased with the improvement, which seemed completely not different to my mother's untrained ear. Maria was a great letter writer. She would type letters almost as a stream of consciousness and then add handwritten comments in the margins. I have one of her few extant letters, as almost all were lost in a fire during the time that Aldous was trying to put a collection of them together for publication. Ostensibly, it's a cake recipe. However, it's continuously interrupted by discussions of guests wandering in, who might turn up later, etc. Perhaps one could actually bake a cake from the directions, but it sure would be a challenge. That said, a great deal of personal news was also conveyed. In the end, we want to acknowledge that Maria Niece Huxley was an uncredited contributor of great importance to Brave New World, and that we've all benefited from her devotion to Aldous and his work. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Trev Huxley, Aldous's grandson. I look around the world today and find myself in a world that seems to be a combination of my grandfather's book, Brave New World, and his former student, George Orwell's 1984. A number of years ago, I sat down with a senior Facebook executive. During our discussions, he looked at me and said, "Trev, we know more about you than you know about yourself." A bit of a boast, but not a very hollow one. At that time, they were acquiring every commercially known database they could get their hands on and compiling that data with their own and creating a profile of everyone on their network. We now live in a society where surveillance has reached in such an extreme level that the Chinese government virtually knows everything about everyone who lives there and can track them everywhere in real time. That's 1984's downside of my reality. Aldous didn't believe oppression would be the successful method of controlling a population, and in many ways he was correct. Yes, the plenitude of desired drugs that stupefies a portion of a population is obvious. Just look around you on the streets. But the super insidious drug in my mind is social media. It has caused the dumbing down of a huge portion of the population, particularly in technologically advanced societies. The invention of doom scrolling combined with sophisticated algorithms that feed only what tickles the pleasure sensors has corrupted the entire fact-based world. Social media combined with the introduction of artificial intelligence, and now we're on the precipice of something that even Aldous may not have imagined in 1932. Brave New World is almost 95 years old, and with that in mind, the foresight and intellectual power of Aldous's brain is astonishing. Many years ago, when I was around 8 or 9, my mother, Ellen Hovde, and I and Aldous went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. What many people don't know is that Aldous went blind at the age of 16 due to an untreated eye disease. He actually learned Braille, about which he once told me, "The great thing about Braille is that one can read under the bedclothes without a flashlight." He would gain some of his sight back, but sight was a precious commodity to him and one that required effort and concentration. If you're interested, you can read his book, The Art of Seeing. So there we were at the museum, Aldous holding what seemed to me at that time a gigantic magnifying glass, peering at paintings at about 2 inches away from the surface, scanning back and forth, finally moving yet to another painting and scanning back and forth again. This went on for approximately 2 hours. You can only imagine, I wanted to scream with boredom and restlessness. To my great relief, we finally left the museum and started walking down Fifth Avenue to the Plaza Hotel where Aldous often stayed. To my sister and myself, the Plaza was a magical place, one we associated with our grandfather. There was nothing like high tea and pastry that brought joy to his every visit with us. With those thoughts, I started to listen to what Aldous was saying to my mother. What he said was mind-blowing. One has to remember what he was able to see through his magnifying glass was probably a square inch or maybe 2 square inches of any given painting at a time. And yet, here he was, walking along, describing to my mother the entire painting itself, and then, of course, adding its art history. And it was at that moment I realized I was in the presence of an intellect that was almost beyond imagination to me. How did he do that? I said to myself. It still amazes me to this day. My sister and I are very pleased to see Brave New World receive the Prometheus Award and the honor it justly deserves, but I would like to honor the man himself, a man of towering intellect and a wonderful grandfather. Thank you.
Thank you all. And now, to present this year's Best Novel Award, here is Michael Grossberg, the Secretary of the Libertarian Futurist Society and the chair of the Best Novel Committee, which selects finalists for Best Novel. Michael?
Thank you. It's great to be here again. Since the Prometheus Award was first presented in 1979, 47 books have won Best Novel. Today, we will honor a 48th. One of the oldest fan-based SF Fantasy Awards, after the Hugos and Nebulas, the Prometheus Awards are distinctive in their dual focus on literary quality and liberty. Quite a few Prometheus-winning novels, novellas, and stories have also won Hugo and Nebula Awards, but only the Libertarian Futurist Society annually recognizes fantastical fiction that champions consistent respect for human rights, especially for the smallest oppressed minority, the individual. Of more than 100 works of fiction that have won a Prometheus Award, many dramatize the perennial tensions between liberty and power, reflecting the wise words of the 19th century classical liberal Lord Acton that power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Other winning works explore the many ways that cooperation, including through free markets, offers voluntary, ethical, and practical alternatives to coercion, especially the institutionalized coercion of the unlimited state. Some works depict dystopian futures that expose authoritarian extremes or left or right, while others imagine better and freer futures. In weaving such libertarian themes into compelling stories, this year's Best Novel finalists seem especially impressive to me, and that matches a consensus of Best Novel judges and other LFS members. I want to thank my fellow judges volunteering to serve on the Prometheus Best Novel Judging Committee for their dedication. They considered more than 4 dozen candidates identified by LFS members, of which 14 novels were judged good enough to merit nomination. Our committee then spent months reading and debating the nominees to select the slate of finalists for the wider membership's final vote to determine the winner. As I read this year's finalists, their stories frequently reminded me of an insight by Pulitzer-winning historians Will and Ariel Durant, who wrote the best-selling 11-volume work, The Story of Civilization. Civilization begins with the first voluntary act and ends with the last. Here are the 2026 Best Novel finalists. Storm Dragon by Dave Freer, Raconteur Press. War by Other Means by Carl K. Gallagher, Kelthaven Press. No Man's Land by Sarah Hoyt, Goldport Press. A Kiss for Damocles by J. Kenton Pierce, Raconteur Press. And Powerless by Harry Turtledove, Kasich, SF and Fantasy. And the winner is A Kiss for Damocles. Launching Pierce's Tales from the Long Night series, the novel revolves around Shay, a young female homesteader on a colony planet, as she and her frontier community confront harsh post-apocalyptic conditions, corrupt townie politics, and orbiting AI weapons preventing the surface use of advanced technology. A Kiss for Damocles offers a cautionary tale about the deceptive rhetoric of a command and control ideology, reflected in the townies' push to extend their rule over homesteaders through higher taxes, fiat money, and state takeover of education to indoctrinate children. But Pierce also deepens our appreciation for the self-reliance and resilience of frontier communities as free women and men forge hard-won progress in overcoming adversity. Above all, A Kiss for Damocles offers an admirable vision of voluntary cooperation, free trade, and mutual respect as the best foundation for building or rebuilding civilization. Remarkably, Pierce has won a Prometheus for his first novel, against stiff competition from other finalists, all written by respected past Best Novel winners. Congrats, Mr. Pierce. We're thrilled to present you with your first Prometheus Award.
Thank you. I am thrilled to be here. It's a tremendous honor. And giving a speech isn't a problem I imagined having, considering that A Kiss for Damocles was up against books by people who have written some of my favorite stories over the years. Before I get into the meat of this, I need to express my gratitude to Leslie Fish, who passed away last fall. She won a Prometheus in 2014 for her novella The Tower of Horses and a paired folk song, The Horse Tamer's Daughter. A few years back, when I only had a few short story sales under my belt, I contacted her to ask permission to use her lyrics in some of my work and the title Avalon is Risen for one of Shai's forthcoming novels. Like a beggar with a bowl, I humbly offered to send her samples of my work so she could decide if she wanted her name to be associated with my stories, with her stories. Excuse me. Sure, kid, it's free advertising, and I'd be happy to beta read some of your stuff, was her reply. After she read A Kiss for Damocles and Warlord of Greenline Town, she gave me a critique and we had some great discussions, and she said the stories were great and deserved to be published. Well, to a struggling new author, that was a real shot in the arm, but what really stood out was her kindness and her encouragement to a new author. I'm always going to be grateful for that. So, on to the tales from the long night. I'm no deep political thinker. I'm a character-driven reader, so I lean in on crafting characters I'd enjoy spending time with. I was that kid who'd rather spend recess with Heinlein's Kip and Pee-wee from Have Spacesuit Will Travel and Podkane of Mars, or Andre Norton's Dane Thorson from the Solar Queen series. People might have noticed there's more than a trace of James H. Schmitz's Witches of Karis, particularly Goth and the Leewit in Shy. I basically try to write loyal friends and good neighbors in the old school country sense. Shy is a good neighbor. She's the country girl with grease on her coveralls who shows up to help you bale hay and figure out why your engine's running rough. Good neighbors offer you a hand when needed, and they don't get into your business or tell you what to do. When I started crafting a conflict with Shy, I wasn't really thinking about politics, financial policy, or government overreach. I'm from coal and coke country, and it bugs me that the company's store game has been fading from the American memory. It seemed like a good source of conflict, grounded in reality, and it didn't need mustache-twirling villains for the antagonists. It's also part of American history that has been falling out of the curriculum. A while back, I started to wonder why the company's store wasn't being trotted out anymore as an example of evil capitalism these days. I think it's because the media priest caste can't bury the fact that every collectivist strain of Marxism is just a company store on a national level with different slogans. About the time Shy's story got to Greenline Town, I noticed the opposition felt flat. The scenery was wobbly, no life to it. I decided to write one scene from the point of view of Ravati Aziz, the militia captain that Shy gives migraines to. That scene turned into a day in Ravati's life, and then a novella, and then the first novel in the Warlord of Greenline Town series. I realized that a town run by a cabal of merchant princes was just another dystopia. While it wouldn't have the usual all-powerful monolithic government, the internal power struggles would work out as meet new bosses, same as old boss. The more I fleshed out Greenline Town from Ravati's point of view, the clearer it became that it was really an emerging civilization trying to decide what direction to take. Excuse me. Noble, practical values butting up against all the old bad ideas that opportunists and grifters like to trot out. Common sense restrictions on liberty in the name of safety, mandatory sacrifices for other people's greater good. The need for more decisions about daily life to be made by professional experts rather than unqualified regular citizens. Lord knows I was seeing plenty of real-world propaganda to provide me with inspiration. False but accurate. It's more important to be morally right than factually accurate or historically correct. And otherwise intelligent people really have to struggle against their own normalcy bias, while the other frogs would say, "You're paranoid. The water's not getting any warmer. Only a conspiracy theorist thinks that a louder hiss from the gas means the heat's being turned up." The real world also stepped up its efforts to remind me that even if I just wanted to mind my own business, politics would eventually make me its business. As I built the Tales from the Long Night setting, I watched the fantasy and science fiction community change. The self-appointed elite started saying the quiet parts out loud. There was a traditional smug condescension towards stories that entertain without being progressive polemics, and I watched that grow into naked contempt. It bounded ahead into outright gleeful malice. People bragged with vicious satisfaction about getting writers, editors, or longtime members of the fan communities disinvited from a convention for wrongthink because of Twitter tantrums and whisper campaigns. Along with that came the denouncements. People I knew started posting things like, "XYZ is an evilist. He said an evilism thing, and there are at least 57 people on my friends list who still like or follow that author. They need to fix that." Then it was struggle sessions, earnest apologies, public abasement by people who had been cast out by their fellow travelers for an old tweet or a slip of the tongue. Frankly, the science fiction fantasy field started reminding me of that episode from The Prisoner, when a big burly guy stood at the podium, degrading himself and bawling in a scripted self-criticism. Being unmutual became the greatest crime in the field of science fiction and fantasy. And I thought things were looking pretty dark. Pro markets were drying up as magazines folded, and agents started decreeing they weren't interested in submissions from untouchable demographics, genders, or sexualities. I figured I was going to have to settle for self-publishing to a readership of maybe 9 people, but Raconteur Press started accepting my short story submissions. Then they said, "I hear you've got some manuscripts set in these Tales from the Long Night." I can't thank Ian and his posse enough, not just for the clean contracts and transparent accounting, but for giving me a chance to tell my stories without sensitivity readers or demands that I provide any sort of political fan service. I'd also like to thank the Libertarian Futurists again. This award means a great deal to me, personally and professionally. It's forced me to shelve any lingering imposter syndrome and recognize that I do indeed have a journeyman's level of skill in the craft, and I can't settle for that. I intend to keep sharpening my tools more with each story. Thank you all, and special thanks to my friends at Raconteur Press. More Tales from the Long Night are coming, and I hope you enjoy them. Until then, stay unmutual, my friends.
Good afternoon, members of society, fans, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Dave Freer and of Kenton Pierce, on behalf of the fans and of the staff at Raconteur Press, allow us to express our delight at our authors winning not one, but 2 Prometheus Awards in our inaugural year of publishing novels and boys' adventure books. We consider this honor for the members of the Libertarian Future Society to be solid proof that there is still a place in this jaded world for stories of courage, self-reliance, honor, resilience, and yes, valor. In this new golden age of publishing, these awards are proof that the field remains wide open to anyone with a vision, drive, and grit. Rita and I would like to thank the members of the Libertarian Future Society for their willingness to consider literature put forth by new authors and new publishers. We recognize that these awards come with an implicit plea to continue publishing works that entertain, that challenge, that uplift, and that satisfy the age-old desire for stories that speak to the better angels of our nature. All of us here at Raconteur Press wholeheartedly agree that these books by Freer and Pierce are the embodiment of these very principles, and we thank you for recognizing their exceptional literary achievements. Please remain assured that Raconteur Press will continue in the vein that we have established with the winning of both awards. Again, thank you from the bottoms of our hearts.
Thank you, Ian. The Best Novel and Hall of Fame awards are given annually, but the Libertarian Futurist Society also gives special awards, not every year, but when there's a deserving recipient. A few years ago, we established the category of special awards for young adult fiction, broadly defined to include juveniles and anything else addressed primarily to younger readers. This year, for the first time, we're giving such an award. To present this award, we have invited Travis Corcoran to speak. Corcoran received our Best Novel Awards in 2018 and 2019 for the 2 volumes of his Aristillus series, The Powers of the Earth and Causes of Separation. This year, he has published a new novel, Red State Mars, with a different setting. He currently serves as a member of the New Hampshire House of Representatives, and we apologize for calling his shame to your attention. We look forward to hearing what he has to say about young adult fiction and about this year's honoree. Travis, you have the floor.
There's a strange thing about systems. They have state, and often state comes in 2 or more types, which trade off against each other. Pendulums, for example, have both kinetic energy and potential energy. When a pendulum is dead still, it is at its highest altitude, and when it's moving rapidly, it is at its lowest. Social phenomena can also have state that's traded back and forth. Hobbies and subcultures often reach their absolute peak at exactly the point when growth has fallen to 0. But there's no law of conservation of energy in subcultures. A hobby can lose both size and energy at the same time. Ham radio, bowling leagues, many hobbies have suffered from losing both altitude and speed at the same time. This is deadly in an airplane as a private pilot, and it's equally deadly to a subculture. It's deadly in a subculture like science fiction generally, or libertarian science fiction more specifically. Which is to say that we libertarian science fiction fans have to be aware that our culture can contract. And because real-world politics is at least partially downstream of culture, liberty in the real world depends on making the case for and normalizing liberty in our culture and our subculture. Many aspects of culture depend on the youth. Most people don't listen to music created after they were 25 years old. Most people don't pick up new slang after a similar age. In spoken language, mutation in pronunciation happens as language instructor mothers pass on their quirks to their children. Every male language speaker is a dead end. So the trick to culture is, as in so many things, grab them when they're young. Whether we're talking about books, movies, music, as the Jesuits say, give me the child for the first 7 years and I will give you the man. Maybe not 7 years exactly, maybe 15 or 20, but the point holds. So if you want to keep written science fiction, and specifically libertarian written science fiction, as a relevant art form, we need to speak to the youth. How do we do that? Well, we write high-quality, liberty-loving science fiction that installs the love of the genre and of the culture for the youth. Okay, great. But just as the quality-obsessed Japanese factory management asks the 7 whys to get to the root cause, we have to ask more questions. How do we get more high-quality libertarian-loving science fiction for the youth? I want to say just one word to you. Just one word. Are you listening? Plastics. Excuse me, I mean incentives. Which brings us to the Libertarian Futurist Society's first special Prometheus Award for young adult fiction. The board members of the LFS have, in their wisdom, created this award, and the idea behind it is simple. If you want more of something, reward it. It's counterintuitive, but it just might work. Dave Freer's novel Storm Dragon was published by Raconteur Press, which targets readers aged 8 to 18, and boys in particular. The novel brings so many things that we all love about libertarian YA science fiction to a new generation of readers. Adventure, the wonders of new worlds, a trust in the power of rationality to solve problems, and a demonstration of the power of freedom to execute those solutions. A distrust, contempt even, for stuffed shirts, naysayers, sinecure holders, and veto-mad bureaucrats. I'm thrilled to be present as Dave receives the Libertarian Futurist Society's first special Prometheus Award for Young Adult Fiction, and I want to congratulate Dave on his accomplishment, not just in writing a great book, but in leading a new generation towards science fiction and towards liberty. And remember what I said about incentives. Let's reward Dave and incentivize him to tackle the same challenge again next year, and incentivize others to get in the game too. The LFS has already given Dave a nice chunk of precious metal, or is about to in 30 seconds, but let's go further. As readers, let's each buy a copy of Dave's book, maybe 2 or 3. We want to send the message to authors and publishers that there's gold in them thar hills, and also in them thar libertarian YA books. Because we all know from Econ 101, moving the demand curve upward will increase the volume of product created and sold, which in this case means liberty. Congrats.
Good afternoon, everybody. For me, here in Tasmania, that's actually good pre-dawn because it's about 3:30 here, a.m. Like many authors, I've kept a notebook next to the bedside so that I could, on waking, hastily write down the gifts that the muse had brought to me and sorted into brilliance while I slept. Unfortunately, the mornings usually reveal gems like Orgvard at speed, Minchkins and Porgies, which I'm sure meant something great at the time and was probably quite brilliant. Hope I'm a little more awake than that, but I'm not betting on it, so I plead forgiveness. Firstly, thank you all for awarding the special Prometheus Prize for young adult literature to my book, Storm Dragon. I'm delighted to accept it. It's flattering for me, but that's really beside the point. The real delight is at the Prometheus, an award which is a reliable indicator that you will love this book, has put its mark on a YA science fiction novel. That puts a valuable imprimatur of a great read onto Storm Dragon. That's important to me. That's trivial. It's what it means to young 10-year-old boys that is really important. This means that it will reach more of them. Look, most young readers probably don't know what a Prometheus Award means, and they don't care. I hope they will start to care after this, but really, it's the people who do respect the value of that award, the adults, who are more likely to put the book in their way. And that's why I'm really delighted to have this book given the award. You see, Storm Dragon was a book designed for a specific purpose, with a particular end in mind. It was quite a despicable thing, which honestly has damaged more reading in general, and YA and middle grade fiction in particular. You see, I confess, Storm Dragon is message fiction. Yeah, message fiction, which I suspect is handled as often with the dexterity of a steam shovel for microsurgery, and has put more people, particularly young boys, off reading than anything else. So knowing that full well, and regarding message dripping offerings, it's much more of a modern children disaster area, a bit like Hakal. Oh, I better digress here. I was a fisheries scientist for many years. I must explain Hakal to those of you who are lucky enough not to know it. Hakal is an Icelandic dish made from basking sharks, which are toxic because of the level of vitamin A. Traditionally, it was caught in autumn, and it was so revolting that they buried it under the beach shingle for winter, and then when they were starving in the springtime, they'd dig it up and cut it into rubbery jelly blocks It tasted just like it smelled, which is one of those delectable combinations of fermented fish and ammonia floor cleaner. It's not poisonous anymore. You may just wish that it was if you had to eat it, like I did, politely. I believe you can get used to it if you have it with enough Brenvin. That's burning wine for anyone who doesn't handle the language. But it's probably not ideal choice as an introduction to food. So, what talked me into writing fiction? Its first purpose was to promote a message. I'm well known for saying that messages have to be so disguised that the readers get them without even being aware of it. That, if it detracts from the book, it's the message that must go. It was the message that convinced me. You see, it's a message that I believe passionately in, that I believe and have promoted all my life, that I believe is of vital importance to our species. Yeah, like most jokers, when you peel the layers back, I'm actually a very serious guy. This is something which is of fundamental importance. This is Prometheus's gift of fire. The message is just this. Reading is fun. Reading fiction is especially awesome. Neil Postman, when talking about Brave New World, put it thus: what Huxley feared is that there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wished to read one. We're already going there. If the younger generation doesn't read, their children won't. I believe this with the passion of a crusader. Everyone who can read should. And the only way that you can make sure that it happens is to make it a pleasurable experience for young readers that they can't wait to try again. Unlike my experience of Huxley, the problem and the reason for my writing this book and for Raconteur starting this line is that we have a real situation where young boys aren't reading. Young girls, just in my opinion, aren't reading enough. And they're reading twice what young boys read. Fiction in particular suffers. Why is that even relevant? Everything's video these days, right? And fiction, bah! I believe it is vital. I truly do. I truly do. To our civilization, to our liberty, to everything that we wish for in our species, especially our young. You see, reading shapes the way we think. Not the content, that can too. But it's actually near irrelevant. It shapes the way we can think, which opens our capacity to think. It requires translating and assembling symbols into words, words into concepts, into images, into things that are themselves far, far bigger than the little word that conveyed the meaning in the first place. It's a process that the brain uses to process and to store information. And more importantly, to create from. Reading is training in this, and the younger a child starts, easier it becomes, and the more building blocks they have to build this with. It's compound interest from there on in. If you don't start them young, they will never accumulate that level of interest. It's a genie which is severely repressed in illiterate societies, and it helps to keep them captive. It's a genie that, once it's freed, can never be put back. Those who champion freedom must champion reading, and particularly reading fiction, because that is what trains the mind in taking the symbolic logic of words and creating what is not. You build images which never existed before. That's what drives us. That's what makes us human. That's what gives us dreams. That will give us the stars. Without that, we're little more than sheep. With it, we have the key to being far, far more. For me, growing up, it was Heinlein Juvies, Jack Vance's Blue World, Sprague de Camp's Lest Darkness Fall. Those are the keys to my loving fiction. And that's why I wrote Storm Dragon. In the style of the Heinlein juveniles, particularly Farmer in the Sky, with the fascinating biology of Vance's worlds, because as a kid, I really loved the science part, and I loved understanding how things worked, and they had to really work, understandably, in my head. And the other thing I really loved was the problem solving in Sprague de Camp. And I've yet to come across a young boy who doesn't approach the same things in the same way. The other things that were really important to me was to add a very fast moving story. We're competing with, as other people have mentioned, social media, and it's not designed to move slowly. So if you want to catch attention, you've got to move fast. Young boys also like clear black and white heroes. I'm sorry, but moral ambiguity is something they will come to understand, but it is new to them then. And I also wanted villains with motivations that I could understand, and that hopefully these young boys could understand too. So look, Storm Dragon has very little introspection. What there is the material for the reader to introspect themselves. There are parents who are normal, good guys, and fathers, as in a Farmer in the Sky, who are role models. I did this with deliberate intent because I believe these are things that boys want in their books. I certainly want the thing that I wanted as a 10-year-old and still do. I wanted a telepathic miniature dragon that could deliver 500-volt shocks and was a snarky by name and nature and could take bites out of you and delighted in mischief. So that's what I put in. I wanted this book to be read. I wanted to inspire authors to follow a similar recipe because it works. I want boys to read this and go on devouring books for the rest of their lives, to start writing them themselves, to get their children reading, maybe on Mars or on the asteroids, or moving towards the stars, to take that gift of fire, already stolen from the gods, and build furnaces in the heavens. It's my dream to pass that torch on, and I'd like to thank Raconteur Press for backing me in this, and the Libertarian Futurist Society for giving this book their vote of confidence. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dave, and congratulations. And finally, I would like to thank all of our members for their support of the Prometheus Awards, which make these events possible. In particular, I thank those who have chosen to contribute at higher levels than membership dues, our sponsors and benefactors. This year, we have established 2 higher tiers for support, silver and gold benefactors. We have had 3 gold benefactors to whom we are especially thankful: Scott Bannister, Steve Galema, and Tim Compara. We are also grateful to our regular benefactors, including John Carmack, Ryan Lackey, Jesse Markowitz, Nathan Odell, and Robert Poole Jr. So let us all join in appreciating them. And we still have most of half an hour left. So I would invite anyone who has comments or questions to present them. Chris Hibbert will be watching and bringing up those of you who have something to say. So please raise a hand or unmute, and we'd like to hear from you if you have a comment to make. Thank you.
I want to thank everyone again for watching and for speaking. I just found this particularly inspiring and heartwarming, and it's rare for us to have a special award, and I think this one was very well deserved. And we had such stiff competition in both of our annual categories this year with so many strong candidates, so that the winners that won were really well deserving.
I'd like to thank Dave Freer for giving a masterclass speech on what Raconteur Press wants for boys' adventure books. Thank you very much for putting into words what we've been trying to achieve. Thank you, Dave.
Well, thank you, Ian. I hope I'll see you in the flesh one day. But it's nice seeing you here. If you pop over quickly in that matter transmitter, I'm going fishing in half an hour.
Thank you, Dave. And we're looking forward to your second book, by the way.
It's dangerously turning into a second trilogy. I have this theory that books for young adults should be relatively short until you've seriously got the readers so addicted that they can't resist the million-word tome. And this one has just run away from me. It's basically a tribute to the fact that I truly and utterly loathed Lord of the Flies. And I thought that it would be nice to write a counterpoint to that. So I have a Castaway story that I'm busy with.
Speaking as your publisher, oh noes.
Come now, ask me a question about fish, somebody.
Don't you think that fish is an obsolete category given what's been going on in cladistics?
Don't get me started. I trained at J.O.B. Smith, remember, which was, after all, where the coelacanth came from. And we spent an awful lot of time on cladistics. And I decided the best thing I could do with it was to avoid it for the rest of my life.
Oh, well, then I apologize for waving a red flag. You?
It's all right. I asked for it.
Well, if nobody has more questions or comments, I guess we can close this off. I'll add my congratulations also to our winners this year. Thank you all for coming.
My pleasure. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. And we will now conclude the ceremony.